Hello, everyone. Welcome to the official ScaleupStream podcast. I'm your host, Hugh Seth. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Jeff Canin, Managing Director at Element 8 Venture Fund, Director at E8 Angels. Jeff, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here virtually.
Yes. Well, I think it would be appropriate, Jeff, if we start with a little introduction. You have such a dynamic resume, and I would love to have our audience, along with myself, to see how did you transition over the years to get to where you are right now?
Sure. Happy to share some of that. I haven't been in the clean tech space forever. In fact, I started my academic background as an engineering undergrad and MBA, and I worked in large systems marketing with IBM for a number of years. But the last 3 decades, I've been in the financial services area. My big chunk of that time was down in San Francisco as a sell-side stock analyst. Again, not clean tech, then it was computer hardware and software. But I came up to the Northwest in the mid-90s and became very involved in university technology commercialization, specifically at the University of Washington and at Oregon State University. And in that capacity, I started to work with extremely early stage companies that were involved in the renewable energy and material science space and became just very active in that arena and joined an organization called E8 Angels, which is the largest and most active clean tech angel group in the country, and worked there on looking into fascinating deals in the space. And we've also formed a venture fund. So our entire focus, and my career focus now for quite a few years, has been in the sustainability and clean tech space.
Okay, that's really impressive, and I think this would transition well to our next question. What is climate tech, and why should society care about it?
Well, I don't think there's any bigger risk element now than climate change, and I think our generation, my generation, will skate by. But if you have children or grandchildren, you can't but be interested in moving the world to a more sustainable environment. I mean, the risks of climate change and environmental destruction are horrendous, and I think increasingly we're seeing recognition not just by investors, but by governments and by corporations on getting very active in mitigating the disastrous impact. And it's a very broad field. When we think of climate tech or clean tech, I think what comes immediately to mind is things like renewable energy, wind, and solar power. But it's far broader than that. It's building materials, it's working towards clean water, and just committing our society, even if it costs money, to a more sustainable future.
Okay. Now, is it possible to reverse the damage done to the climate? And if it is, what would it take to do so?
I think it's going to take a lot bigger commitment than we're seeing now from governments and from the investment community. It's very frightening to me, and I think, in fact, to some degree, we can't completely reverse the damage that's been done. And so I think a lot of effort is going to have to go into not just mitigating the impact, but also dealing with accommodating and dealing with the results. But the amount of money that's going to need to be invested to cut back on greenhouse gas emissions and environmental damage is, I think, beyond the amount that we're currently considering. And I think Western countries, particularly the U.S. and Europe, are going to have to lead the charge, in part because if you look at the level of greenhouse gases in the air today, it's largely because of what Western society has done. And so I think the pressure is going to be on us, particularly the U.S., to sort of lead the effort. But a concern I have is that we just don't have the full commitment by our government and by our corporations to do the amount of investment that's going to be required.
So that's really interesting. It sounds sort of like a glass half empty type of outlook in a sense, but then I really understand why that's the case. I mean, for something so important to not necessarily have a fixed budget that is needed to really cause impactful change, I can see why you're coming from the perspective that you are.
I'm not totally pessimistic. I think it's just a little late in the game, and I think now it's going to be the time to really make the commitment. And the challenge is it's going to cost something. I mean, if you look at just the issue of greenhouse gas, we don't see it, we don't smell it. I mean, if greenhouse gases is nitrous oxide and methane and carbon dioxide were dark gray and smelled terrible, we'd be more conscious of it. But
Right.
it's out there, and it's essentially a free externality. So companies are not paying for the long-term damage. And that's what we're all going to have to be willing to do, whether it's through taxation or paying a little bit more for our energy and for the other things that we consume. It's not going to have a happy ending. So we're just going to have to acknowledge that there's going to be costs involved and recognize that we need to pay that now.
Cost and speed. Okay. I concur with that. Now, what areas do you look to invest in?
It's pretty broad. Now, again, we have a 110-member angel group called E8 Angels, and over the last 16 years, our members, and we're up to 110 now, have invested north of $40 million in about 110 companies. And it's really across the entire spectrum of clean tech. A lot of it has been in energy efficiency and renewable energy, particularly next generation solar. But we also invest in certain agricultural technologies and water purification technologies and new building materials. So it's really across the entire spectrum of sustainability. But if I look at some specific areas that I think are particularly interesting now, I think energy storage, because we've got a lot of maturity in terms of the energy generation technologies, again, like wind and solar, but they're intermittent by definition. You only produce solar energy when the sun shines. You only have wind energy when the wind blows. So we need to couple that with storage, whether that's storage through next generation battery technology or hydrogen, but we need to address storage. And another area that we find very interesting is water purification. In part because of the impact of climate change, we're seeing water stress in many, many parts of the world, including in our own agricultural sector here in the U.S. And so among the areas we're looking for is low-cost, energy efficient water purification technologies like desalination. Those are two areas that we find very interesting. I guess a third area I'd point to is new building materials to make our offices, homes, corporate facilities much more energy efficient in terms of HVAC and new glazing materials for windows. So building materials, energy storage, water purification are three specific areas that we find particularly interesting.
All right. If we were to discuss qualities in founders, what are some things that stands out to you as far as investing goes? Well,
optimally, we would find successful entrepreneurs who have done it before in clean tech. But in fact, clean tech is a relatively new sector. So we look for successful entrepreneurs with a proven track record, but it might be in a totally different area, like software. So background of the entrepreneur, realism in terms of their financial projections and the amount of capital they need, and access to proprietary technology, because as investors, we're looking for companies that are not only sustainable in terms of their commitment to the environment, but that have some, you might say, sustainable unfair advantage in having proprietary technology.
Okay. would this be more so in the pre-seed, seed, Series A? Do you have a preference as to what exactly, or is it kind of open-ended?
Well, first of all, the nature of our group is that we do tend to be very early stage investors. We tend to come in at the, you might even say pre-seed or seed or Series A stage. And often we find super entrepreneurs, but we want to make sure that either they are able to scale with the company, and that's kind of a rare situation, or that they have the willingness at the right point in the maturity of the company to bring in someone else as a professional CEO or COO. So we want entrepreneurs who are very well aware of both their capabilities and their limitations. And we also really look for an entrepreneur who's willing to learn from others. I mean, we like to think, and maybe this is arrogant, but we like to think we bring more than money to the table, that we bring expertise and connections. So we do want an entrepreneur that's approaching us as true team members as we look to invest.
Right, and I love what you just ended up with, Jeff. I mean, I tend to, when I speak with startups, I like to let them know that it's not just the money that matters in this investment process, but who are you working with, and that mentorship aspect of things as well, access to network along with mentorship. But obviously, in order to get mentored, you need to be teachable, right? So how often do you come across founders that they're just not trying to listen to anything that anyone has to tell them about about business, right? And
absolutely, and relatedly, just as we do a lot of due diligence on the companies that we're considering investing in, we really ask the entrepreneurs to do their due diligence on us or any other prospective investor they may look at. Now, keep in mind that in my past, I've worked a lot with frighteningly early stage spin-outs from university. It might have an Excel spreadsheet and a patent or something, but it's really that rare entrepreneur coming from that world that we can have confidence that they'll be successful. Because there's two categories that are problematic, again, particularly from the university environment. There are some professors who are fabulous teachers, but they have almost a condescending attitude to the concept of commercialization, like writing papers and mentoring their students. It's very difficult to deal with that type of founder if you're looking to build a sustainable company. But the opposite end also is problematic. And this isn't just for a university professor, but any early stage entrepreneur, someone who, as I pointed out, is not willing to recruit professional management at the right point down the road. And that's, you really have to have an instinctive feel for their willingness to do that, because they may not know, or they may have to learn that the hard way. So it's a delicate process of coaching a strong-minded entrepreneur, but I'd say by and large we've been pretty successful in doing that.
Right. Okay. No, I agree with that. So I know you have a pretty busy schedule, so I want to end off with one more question. If you could leave our startup community with any finishing remark, either word of encouragement or any advice, what really comes to mind as far as that goes?
Well, I would just say, again, speaking to my focus on clean tech, there has never been a better time for an entrepreneur to pursue a startup in this area. We are far and away at record levels of funding commitments to new funds in the clean tech space. And finally, a decent recognition by corporations, your potential customers, of the importance of this. So it's a terrific time to be out taking your idea to the market. And, we welcome any of your audience to connect with us, and we'd be delighted. We like to think, even if we can't give you money, we can give you some good tips and advice.
Wow. Even though I'm not in the clean tech space, I feel very ecstatic right now from what you just said. I mean, just knowing that there's capital floating around there, amidst a pandemic and all of these things that are going on. It's just amazing. And so if you're listening to this, Jeff is the man. If you're in his space, you've already heard what he looks for. So, Jeff, we really appreciate you joining us here at the ScaleupStream podcast. It's been such a honor having you on the show today.
Great. I really appreciate the opportunity. Best of luck to you and your audience.